Hey everybody, David Chatham here with Angel Oak Creative. Welcome to our latest episode of Nonprofit State of Minds, our podcast here. First year doing this, and it's been really fun and exciting. We've had some great guests on. That trend continues today with Brad Tisdale with BT Advisors. Brad is a fractional CFO, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. But welcome, Brad. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. Happy to be here. This is great.
Well, you know, Brad and I met through, I guess, LinkedIn somewhere along the way, right? And,
Right. Yeah.
kind of struck up a conversation. And as we were speaking, it was, I'm thinking, of all the things that nonprofits avoid addressing a lot of
Yeah.
times, it's like that, the elephant in the room, which is financial issues. So I thought, let's just face it head on, and we'll get an expert in here to talk about it, and just see if some folks might learn some things, maybe get inspired a little bit, and hopefully maybe take a little different view of what finances are about, and how nonprofits can be good stewards, to be sustainable, to have a strategy when it comes to their finances, all of those things. So
Yeah.
first, I guess, tell us a little bit about people may not know what a fractional CFO is or what that looks like. So tell us a little bit about that work, and
Sure.
then maybe, go into how you came to get involved in the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, absolutely. No, love to. Well, fractional CFO does sound something a little bit foreign or odd, but essentially the thinking is that many nonprofits don't have the resources to go out and hire, full-time financial strategic help. And so I'm trying to fill a place in the market where, on a part-time basis, they can have access to high-level executive kind of decision making and financial help for nonprofits. And it's been a great experience so far, and just really having those good business conversations, some things that seem to kind of be missing a lot of times in nonprofits. A lot of people in nonprofits are very missional. I came up through the program, through the service that we're providing, those kind of things. And then they find themselves in the lead seat and they're like, whoa, what do I do here? I'm actually running a business. Like, how does this happen? And so I like to come alongside those leaders and say, okay, we can figure this out. Like, we can get our finances straight, we can get our budgeting done, and I can help you make those business decisions, even talk about fundraising. And so, but it's just in a part-time basis, so it's an affordable way of doing it, but it's just a
Yeah.
great way to access some just kind of high level experience in this specific area. And that's kind of the fraction of a full-time CFO. So that's kind of where what I would call that. How I got here is quite an interesting story. I'm from the territory of Jimmy Buffett and Hurricane Katrina. And
Oh, yeah.
so the Mississippi Gulf Coast, if nobody ever realized, there's actually a beach that touches the Gulf of Mexico down there. So that's where I grew up. But I'm going off to college, and my dad says, well, son, what are you going to major in? I'm like, Dad, I don't know. I think I'm just probably going to go into business or something like that. And he's like, no, you're not going to go into business. If you're going to go into business, you're going to go into accounting, because if you know how to run the numbers, then you can run any business out there. I'm like,
Wow.
okay, Dad, I
Some
guess
wise
that's
advice.
right. So I just, yes, sir. And we're going into accounting. So I get through the accounting program and I look up and I'm working at a big four public accounting firm. So global, huge firm, thousands of employees. And I'm working there here out of Jackson, Mississippi. So I'm starting my career plowing through that. And I look up one day and I'm working on these hospitals, nonprofits. I'm working on educational schools, foundations. And I'm like, what is going on here? I want to work on the cool clients. I want to work on the banks and the startups and on the insurance company, all these companies that make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so, but little did I know that I was on a trajectory there. I was on a trajectory to settle into nonprofits and serve in that way. So I spent the next 14 years after that serving in a CFO, COO role in the educational institution. It was a large seminary. and it's really one of the largest seminaries in the country. So we had
Wow.
over 100 employees, $20 million annual budget, $120 million in assets, 9 locations across the country.
Wow.
And so I was the CFO and is actually asked to be the COO as well of that. So over all the business functions. And it was a great experience, great opportunity to see what good governance looks like, to work well with lots of divisions and people. And so that was great. So after that, I've said, well, I've learned how to do this work. How can I go and share this work with others that don't really know which direction to go from a finance perspective? And so that's where that's where I find myself now. Find myself here doing this CFO work for multiple organizations and really enjoying it.
Wow, yeah, it's funny how our journeys are, we can't plan them as well as we think we can. They kind of take on a life of their own. So, I mean, what is it that you enjoy about the nonprofit sector? What has drawn you to this work and kept you here?
Oh, well, I love it because when I was working in public accounting, big corporate culture, and then I went to the nonprofit side of things, I just felt, every organization is going to have a mission statement, so to speak, but it just means more in the nonprofit space. When you get up every day, you are working for that mission. That's what drives you. You're making a difference and an impact in a community. And that's so much better, so much more worthwhile than just trying to meet the bottom line or trying to increase shareholder value or business value and so that's really where I enjoy it. Working with the organizations that I do and the employees I do, they'll run through a brick wall for their work. They will, just really give every ounce of energy and effort for their mission because they're really important. It's important work that's going on. And so
Yeah.
I get to do that and see that in lots of different ways. And it's just become a part of my DNA, as it does. If you get into the nonprofit world or you start sniffing around it, you get a little taste of that meaning, that impact that you can get through nonprofits. And it's kind of addictive. I mean, it's just like, man, I'm feeling something more meaningful in my life by doing
Yeah.
this work, as opposed to just going and working for a salary or business or something like that.
No, that's great. And you get to it sounds like you enjoy the accounting world. It's not a drudgery for you. So I'm glad somebody does, because that's not something I enjoy. It's like the opposite of
That's right.
of my preference, but it takes all kinds, right? So
It
we
sure
got
does.
to,
It sure
my brother and his wife are accountants, so I am familiar with that world a little bit. But
does.
yeah, it's when you start talking about nonprofit finance, I think a lot of people get a little uncomfortable, right? Because certainly nonprofits have an obligation to be transparent in many ways. They have their 990s they have to file, and they have all those things that they have to report on in terms of where their money goes and how to be accountable. But there's still a level of that. Just talking about money makes people uncomfortable sometimes, right? So,
Right.
from your perspective for nonprofits, what are some of the biggest challenges they face from a financial perspective, whether it be stewardship or strategy or any of those things? What are some of those things that you have seen to be the biggest hurdles for them to really be successful in that spot?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one place we have to start, and you kind of alluded to it, is that we have a responsibility to be on top of our finances. We know that. And there's nothing that can hurt a nonprofit organization more than even the potential misappropriation or doing something wrong with the finances. I mean, I just read an article in the paper in Birmingham, Alabama. There was a CFO of a nonprofit there, and her daughter had access to credit cards, and they spent $380,000 out of this great nonprofit bank, and they were using on all kind of things, but there weren't the right checks and balances in place. And I guarantee you, the reputation, the donors, everybody, and that organization it's tanking right now because nobody was looking over that. That's cataclysmic for a nonprofit. I mean, we are reputations. That's what it's built on. And if you don't have a strong reputation to go to your donor and trust there to talk to your donors about it, that's just part of being on top of your finances. That's just a
Yeah.
big thing. And so, but what I've found too is that a lot of these nonprofits are challenged in the financial space. They have a half a secretary that's kind of keeping the books over here, and maybe every once in a while they reconcile a bank statement and those kind of things. And the sad thing is that's a large part of it. Now, as you grow in the size of the nonprofit, as you get bigger and taking more donations and more employees, you have to kind of upscale those financial services. But even as you do, a lot of organizations and business leaders and nonprofit leaders don't really know how to do that in a good way. And so having a good bookkeeping service to make sure that the numbers coming in are presented correctly, that's number one. You got to have a good, strong bookkeeping service. And some people choose to do that internally and have a staff member there. Some people choose to outsource that. I can see benefits of both. But then not only just getting a qualified bookkeeper to give you the finances, making sure that they're on top and doing the right things, to make sure that those are in place and being done in a timely manner, whether that's reconciling credit card reports, or whether that's having the right documentation, or getting to having the right processes in place. That's really important. I think that, and a lot of times nonprofit directors don't really know how, so the bookkeeper might actually get the finances together. Say there's a great book, they get the finances together, they have it, and they say, all right, Mr. Executive Director, Mr. President, here are your monthly financials. And that executive director gets those finances, and they're just like, it's just a bunch of numbers. Like, what do I do with these
Right.
things?
What does it
What does
mean?
this mean?
Right.
And so I think it's really important to point out that when those numbers are presented to the director, they're looking at something that's already happened. It's the past. You can't change that. And so
Right.
then, but it's pulling those numbers together and saying, what is the story? What's the story, the financial story that's being told here of my nonprofit or organization? And so that's one thing. You have to be able to interpret the numbers and be able to do that. And that's one thing I enjoy coming alongside the executive and say, okay, this is what's going on, and providing some knowledge of when you get those finances. This is what's happening here. But
Yeah.
then what a CFO can also help you do is to chart out a forward looking strategy. Did anybody ever really know that you can actually forecast your finances and plan for where you might land? I mean, a lot of people that might think that's a foreign concept, right? But you can absolutely do that. Now, you might take a mix of your annual budget, which is a big thing that we want to make sure that we're all doing. And when you do your annual budget, you want to make sure that you're not only budgeting expenses, but you're also budgeting revenues. And
Right.
that might sound like a no-brainer, but I've seen lots of them that don't do that still. So
Yeah.
these are some of the basic things that you want to do. And a lot of times you just need help to sift through some of this stuff and make sure that the numbers are right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're speaking my language a little bit with the story. What story does it tell, right? So
Right.
that's a lot of what we do here at Angel Oak,
Yeah.
is tell stories and look at that. What does a nonprofit's finances, what kind of story can it tell from both kind of a positive standpoint, but also what can it tell from a negative standpoint? What's kind of an example of that, or some kind of concept of that?
Right. Great question. Well, one way to tell the story of the finances is to look at trending. So you can look at trends like, how did I do in January, February, March, April, May, June? Am I trending up or down? Or how did I do this June compared to last June? And so when I prepare financials for my clients, I'm looking at 13 months. So right here, we're wrapping up and everybody's closing out their October books, hopefully right now. And so we're closing out our books. We would compare our trending for this whole year.
Some may
And
be in
then
September still, though, right, Brad?
that's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. Exactly. Don't do that. Don't do that. Got to stay on top of these things.
I'm
And
sorry. I'm
so
sorry.
the
Go ahead.
trending is one thing, trending in gifts, trending in program revenue, trending in expenses. Are we up? And then the other thing is trending in cash. How do our cash reserves are looking, and those kind of things? Are we depleting our cash, or are we adding to our cash? And how does that look going forward? And then you can also take multi-year approaches if you want to. Well, how do we do 1 year versus another year? And just putting a narrative around those numbers and saying that out loud and spending the time to analyze that is something that a lot of people just don't take the time to do. They just look at the bank balance and say, okay, do I have enough in the bank? Well, okay, we're all right. Can we make payroll next month? Yes, okay. And then they're doing this math in their brain. They're like, okay, I had that expense coming through and those kind of things. I think we're going to be okay. Like, that is draining. That is
Yeah.
stressful and anxious. So, and creates anxiety. So why not chart this out on a spreadsheet in a pretty simple manner that you can understand
Yeah.
with historical and future data that can let you rest easy and help you sleep well instead of worrying about whether I'm going to be able to make payroll next month or not.
Yeah, and it's funny. I can't remember where the conversation came from, but there was a conversation I had recently about, well, nonprofits can't turn a profit, right?
Right.
And but that doesn't mean they shouldn't have money in reserves, right? It doesn't mean they should have leftover money, right?
Right.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
The idea of you know of making more than you spend, and why is that a good thing for nonprofits? And that doesn't mean they're profitable necessarily, but it does mean that they have a positive cash position, I guess.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
way to think about it, right?
Look at you using that accounting term. I'm proud of
Oh
you.
man, I tell
Yeah.
you that
Yeah.
one, I had to pull deep for that one, Brad.
Well, look, absolutely right. This is a matter of stewardship we're talking about. If we are just running negative deficits or trying to run our cash month to month, that is not good for anybody. And so we want to plan to have some cash reserves in place. So what I would be looking for a nonprofit, I would be encouraging a board to set some type of policy for an operating reserve or cash reserve. And that might be 60 days or 90 days of cash. And we just monitor that. So if something happens, then at least you have 2 to 3 months to fix that. Okay. Right. So the first step is operating cash. What's that policy? Some boards might want 6 months. Some boards might want a year, depending on where you're at. And so that's the first thing. What's our operating cash reserve? The next level from that is what I want to call a strategic reserve. And so this is something that I was just talking to somebody about this the other day, that you would want to have some money in the bank for the board or management to be able to make a strategic investment in something going forward, or in case an emergency happens and something is needed, and so having that next layer. And then the next layer on top of that would be some type of endowment or long-term investment or those kind of things. Each layer has a reason and a position. And people might be listening to this and being like, an endowment's so far away from me.
Barely making my payments, right?
That's
on
right.
on the rent here.
That's right. How do I even do that? Well, part of it is just putting a plan in place,
right,
and having a goal out there and putting that on a piece of paper and say, okay, I want to have X amount of dollars in my strategic reserve next year or my operating reserve. And let's track that and see how we're doing to our goals. And just by putting it on paper, you're gonna want to look at, and you're gonna start making decisions on a daily basis to try to accomplish those certain goals, to build that cash reserve or find that strategic reserve or whatever. And so you got to do
but
that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna, if you don't do those kind of things, you don't have those reserves, then you really put your nonprofit in a precarious position.
But as a nonprofit, if I'm a supporter, if I'm a donor of a nonprofit, which I'm guessing we both are in some ways, right? If I'm looking at someone at an organization that has, maybe they're, $1 million operating budget, they've got, $100,000 in reserves. Should I be happy about that as a donor? Should I be saying, well, why aren't they putting that money towards services, or why aren't they using that money to help more people? What argument can a executive director make to donors, to boards, to say, this is the responsible thing to do? I know that money could be going to serve people, but what's that argument for saying we need that money to be there, on hand, right?
Yeah, great question. Well, I would say there are multiple things that the board is responsible to be stewards of and to have care for. One is the employees. If you don't have some kind of reserve, you're putting all those employees that are working and giving their lifeblood into that nonprofit, you're putting them at risk, and their families and everything there. Two is the mission. The mission for the nonprofit has been going for X number of years, has been rocking along, and we're trying to keep things moving forward. If we don't have some type of savings or plan for how we're going to do that, then we put the mission and all the work that we've been doing into jeopardy. And
Mm,
so I think this is a stewardship. It is not, and there can be decisions. Every board can make a decision on how much they feel comfortable about saving, they wanting to keep on the sidelines. But to me, it's about protecting the employees, the mission, the integrity of all the work that's going on.
yeah.
And yeah, every organization can decide on how much they want to ride on that line.
Is there, is there a magic number? Is there a percentage? Is there something that maybe is best practice or something that you recommend that people should be thinking about? Here's the goal we're working towards, even if we can't do it this year. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a cash reserve or operating reserve, and this is what I'm thinking about, just to be able to meet your budget, pay your expenses, make sure that payroll is not in jeopardy, those kind of things. I mean, I've seen clients that range anywhere from 60 days to 6 months. I mean,
Okay.
they want that number of cash. So take your budget and divide it in half, and that's 6 months, right? And then a quarter is 3 months, and say, okay, that's the amount of cash that we want to try to retain in our operating account. And it might
Right.
go up and down around there, but you can easily graph that out and see where you're at in relation to that. And that can be a board decision, and that's
Yeah.
great. That they can.
And have you seen anybody fundraise around that kind of ask? I mean, it's not something that's common for us. Is there, I mean, Bill, one of the things we talk about often with our nonprofits is having some built-in sustainability, right? Whether
Right.
it's through monthly donors that are, that you're able to rely on, at least on a, semi-regular basis of, they're given X amount each month, and that helps you to plan, right? Because you have more predictable income.
Right.
I've not, though, heard of anybody kind of raising money on this idea of we need to build up our reserves, right? So I
Right.
don't know. Have you ever run into that, or is that something?
Yeah, no, I think you absolutely could if you wanted to. I mean, what that means is if you want to build up reserves, you're going to have to run an operating surplus and bring in more money than when you're spending out, right? And so that's
Right.
the only way to add to your cash position. But I do think there's probably some good donor asks that you could think around that. I mean, there's a case to be able to say, hey, look, we run ourselves ragged trying to worry about this. And me as the president and executive director, I am worried every month about this. And if we could raise this, and this might be major donor work, this might be
Right. I
one
was wondering,
particular.
yeah, I don't think you go out and ask the masses, right? But you
That's right.
identify a handful and say, if we had $500,000 in our reserves, that would make us a more sustainable, more dependable kind of organization that is not at risk of, I mean, COVID is a good example, right? Nobody knew what to expect. Some organizations flourished in COVID because people gave to food banks and they gave to that, but others, like arts organizations, really got hit hard.
Right.
And if they didn't have a reserve, if they didn't have something on hand, their ability to continue to operate beyond COVID was, and I know of a number of organizations that had to shut down or dramatically decrease their impact because of they weren't able to continue to raise that kind of money or didn't have access to it, and they didn't have a reserve in place to maintain operations. So
There you
I think,
go. That's why we need it. That's why we need it.
yeah. What are the, what do you hear from, I'm guessing you speak to some boards every now and then about and I don't know if there are objections maybe or just concerns, but what do you hear from the board about, you know, issues related to an organization's, financial strategy? What concerns do they say, bring up in those kind of meetings?
Sure, sure. I think the one thing is you want to make sure that the board feels confident in the numbers. I mean, you just got to know that on the
Yeah,
front end. I mean, I know they might, but they just got to have confidence to know what they're looking at and what you're presenting to them is
a good point.
sound and correct. Okay, so that's just a baseline. That's not answering your question, but that's a
No,
baseline.
that is it. Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah.
And sometimes you might not actually have that or it might just be three numbers out there. So I think financial reporting is actually a really important thing. If you have good, strong financial reporting that's telling that story, that financial story
Yeah.
of the nonprofit, then the board's going to have more confidence in what you're presenting to them and those kind of things. So that's going to lessen the particular concerns or challenges that they have. Another challenge I see that boards kind of run into and nonprofits, depending on the size, run into is segregation of duties, making sure that the person that's taking in the checks is not the same person that's inputting into the bank and the same person that's recording it and those kind of things. That's a real challenge
Yeah.
sometimes when you have small accounting
Interesting.
staff or one bookkeeper. And there's some ways that you can work around that and try to figure that out too. I think, boards, they really just want to make sure and see that you feel like that you're kind of on top of it with a good set of planning and rules. Are we doing an annual budget? Most are doing an annual budget. Yes. Is that something that we look at? How much do we put into that? Those kind of things. And I think those are just kind of base level type things. So I really think financial reporting is a big thing and
Yeah.
and yeah.
So if an organization, as you mentioned, maybe they have some bookkeeping going on, maybe they have a little bit of that, and maybe they feel like they're pretty strong with their, basic financial situation. But, if they are considering a fractional CFO or some other kind of, financial strategy support, what should they look for? What are the things that, other than, BT advisors,
Right.
what are the characteristics that make up a good financial advisor for nonprofits? What does that
Yeah.
look like?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think you just kind of said it one way. You want to make sure that they have experience in nonprofits, right? And
What about if the board knows somebody who can just come in and help, and they're not going to charge them anything? Is that
right. No, that happens a lot. Oh, I know so and so, they can come in and help and well, I think you just got to be careful. You got to make sure that somebody's going to be really committed and into it. So nonprofits really care about character. We care about the mission. And so make sure that person can actually knows what you're doing and can feels burdened by that and wanting to help in those ways too. I mean, I think that's kind of icing on the cake. That's not necessarily a requirement to be a fractional CFO, but that just really helps because you want everybody on your team. When I come into a client, I tell them on the front end, I want to be considered a part of the team, even though
Yeah,
I'm a little part time. I'm a contract. I'm sure you say the same thing in Angel Oak. We
we
want
do.
to be considered, as a part of it, and I want to be in on some leadership team meetings. I want to be on the other end of the phone call and answer those questions, and so that's really important because you kind of get into the mode and it takes a while to learn a nonprofit as far as how things work, what's the culture like, those kind of things. So you really want to kind of interview somebody that would they be a good part of your team.
Right.
But then the technical pieces, making sure that they have that nonprofit accounting piece, and even if there's certain areas within your organization that like I think I need a little bit more attention here or there, make sure that fractional CFO can address those issues and talk and talk to them and help you move those forward. A lot of people just say, "Oh, I just need help with my finances. Come, I need some help. I don't know what's going on, or I got to change bookkeepers, or my bookkeeper's leaving, and I don't know how to figure this out." And so there's certain areas that you probably need to focus on, and most of the time people are going to hire a fractional CFO in a time of crisis, right, or something that or a certain event that pops up. They're like, oh, I got this big gift, I don't know what to do, or my
Right.
bookkeeper's leaving, like I say. And so yeah, I think just hiring somebody that has the good experience and can really kind of get behind your mission as well and be a part of the team is some of the things to look for.
Is there a particular kind of baseline or benchmark of when an organization of what size or what revenue or any of those things should they consider that? I mean, does it make sense, for a certain organization size, but maybe not for a smaller one, or is it
Yeah.
just?
Yeah, there is. And I think, from a CFO perspective, and let me do a quick thing, there's three levels of a finance department that everybody needs to know and make sure. And there's you have the bookkeeping level that's transactional. The next level, and everybody has to have that to start out. You need a set of books. The next level up as you grow in your nonprofit, you need that director of finance or controller level. That's more analytical. That's going to be, okay, let me figure out. And then the next level up is the CFO or the strategic piece. Where do I need to go and move forward? So those are the three building blocks of a finance department. And a lot of times I see nonprofits or executive directors call their bookkeeper a CFO, or ask their CFO to do bookkeeping or anywhere in between. And it really needs to build upon each other as it grows. So I would say when you get around the $2 million annual revenue, that's when you can start thinking about a nonprofit CFO. And so at that point in time, you should have strong bookkeeping, maybe even some analytical pieces. And I can even help with some of the analytical controller pieces and some. I could be bringing people there, but that's the baseline where I start. Now I have some clients that are smaller than that, and they're growing and they're trying to figure things out, or they're about to enter a capital campaign or about to take on a big building project or something that's really going to amp their nonprofit up. Well, then you do need some strategic help to think.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it was something I was curious about there. That just what's the trigger, right? When's the time to pull that lever in?
Right.
Well, thank you so much for your time. What 2 or 3 things would you want to make sure you leave with? Most, from my understanding anyway, most of our listeners are kind of leaders in the nonprofit space in terms of their executive directors or development directors, marketing directors. What are 2 or 3 things that you want them to be sure they heard in this podcast?
No, I think that's great. Thank you. I would say don't be lazy on your finances. There's too many bad things that can happen. And it can really detract from the health of the nonprofit. So make sure the bookkeeper's tight, make sure we're staying on top of them, make sure you're getting financials that actually help you make decisions. That's one thing. And the other thing, just do the basics, make sure that we are doing an annual budget that actually means something, that is not just rolled forward, that's vetted by, your board or your treasurer or somebody. That's a really important piece too. And, and just also realize that this is a long-term game, right? And it may feel like the craziness of the things that's going on every day, right? And the churn and all the decisions in front of you. It's important to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, the bigger story, the finances, and try to figure out where things have gone right, where things have gone wrong, and reflect on that. And maybe having somebody to help you do that is important. Here's the last thing I would say. Finances don't have to be a detractor to your mission. A lot of times I see executive directors are just overwhelmed with the need and the finances and the questions and the not knowing. It doesn't have to be that way. That can actually hurt your effectiveness as a leader, can hurt your mission as an organization if the finances are just so stressful. And so getting some perspective on that, trying to figure out where you've been and where you want to go, and put some things in place to try to map out a plan to get there, can just relieve so much and help you be better in your nonprofit and help your organizational health.
Great advice. Brad, if somebody wants to find out about fractional CFOs, BT advisors, how can they learn more about your work and what you're doing?
Great. Thank you, David. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And so you can find me there. And my email address is brad@btadvisors.co. So those are the best places to get me.
Keeping it simple.
That's right.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for geeking out with us a little bit on finances. You kept me awake, so that's a good thing. Talking about money and all of those things. And from an Angel Oak perspective, we know that when our clients are in a stronger financial position, that it's a lot easier for them to tell their story, right? It's a lot safer for them to tell their story. And it's a lot more effective when they're able to come at it from a position of strength and not from a position of desperation or urgency, right? And there are times when that happens. We've seen it with our clients where a disaster hits or something happens and there's a sense of urgency. But on a day-to-day basis, that stability is donors sense that and they feel that when, but if you're in a place where you're having to ask for money every week because you need to make the payroll, some donors don't see that as a positive thing, right? That they see that as a sign that of maybe poor leadership or maybe poor planning or maybe a combination of a lot of things. So financial stability doesn't just, I think, affect the bottom line necessarily. I think it affects also the way that people view and perceive and the way that an organization is able to talk about itself. And a position of strength is always better than a position of desperation. And you may raise some more money in a desperate state, but the sustainability of that is not likely to continue if you don't prove that you're a good steward of that money in the long run, right? So
that's right.
Thank you for your time. Thanks everybody for listening. We've got some other great conversations. You can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all those platforms. AngelOakCreative.com is our website, and would love to just have people listen to the Nonprofit State of Minds podcast. Check out Brad's work, and we look forward to the next conversation. Thank you, Brad. Look forward to staying in touch.